Welcome to Voices for the Future. I am your co-host, Anadea Judith, and I started this with Michael. Want to say a couple words?
Hi, hey everyone, I'm Michael Wayne, and I started this with my co-host Anadea after last year redoing the Visionary in the Future webinar series. And then this year we felt it'd be great to talk with a lot of different people who are doing just really important things for the world, for each other, and trying to embrace a positive vision.
And we try to cover a broad range of topics because there are so many fronts that need changing and evolution in the world right now. And of course, at the foundation of all of them is the health of our planet, our environment, and that future. Without saving that, there is no future of anything else. So for that reason, we invited Mark Dubois, someone I have known off and on for many years, maybe a couple decades, and seen here and there. And Mark, let me read you his bio for a moment. He'll tell us all about this, but a relationship with a river is what transformed his life. And he's worked with the Pachamama Alliance and their partners, the co-international coordinator. He was the co-international coordinator of Earth Day in 1990 and 2000, where he collaborated with thousands of groups in 184 countries and got 200 million citizens actively engaged. He was awarded the largest peace event in human history. He co-founded the International Rivers Network, Friends of the River. I didn't know you were the founder of that. I give to them. And the Environmental Traveling Companions. One of his actions was recently featured in a film, Voice of the River, and we'll show you some screenshots from that beautiful, beautiful film. And so I know that your foundation of your being is found in nature, in everything you do, Mark. So welcome to the show and say hello to people.
Well, thank you for having me. And again, just thank you for inviting people to think about holding the future. It seems like we're, we too often focus on the bad, and we have to not be in ignorance, yet we forget to focus on how much is emerging all around us. And so thank you for hosting and inviting and reminding people how much is going on all these different fronts as more and more people follow their own heart's journey and tackle what appear to be impossible work, and all of a sudden they're making things possible. So thank you, thank you.
And you're one of those people making things possible, including the founding of Earth Day and all that you've done. So let's start with your experience on the river. What did the river teach you about the evolutionary journey and coming into a thriving future?
Sure. Well, first I'll just say I wasn't the founder of Earth Day. I joined Dennis Hayes, who organized the first Earth Day, and I just got to help take it international with one other colleague. So most of our colleagues were organizing America, where the biggest consumption and the biggest slumber is having the biggest impact on the planet. And you somehow you used the word that, again, I didn't engage those 200 million. We held an invitation that resonated all around the world. And so it was just so humbling to be a part of that. But just tiny corrections on language, because I'm, anyway, we're all just one person here in all of this. So, for me, the river was such a powerful teacher. I feel like, I'm sure I went to college, and yet what I learned in the river was more profound than anything I ever learned in academia or anything I've read. And I still don't have language for what the river began to teach me. So that's always felt me a little cobbled linguistically, going, but there's something that I can't even put into words.
The river
But
speaks its own language, but maybe even tell people what did you live by the river? When was that in your life?
yeah,
How long were you
okay,
there? What river was it?
sure. Well, in my teens, I'm born and raised in Sacramento, like my mom, which is rare in California because we're, it's such a migratory state, and it was newer. And again, being interested in caves, the only limestone canyon was in the Stanislaus, the river just north of Yosemite that drains into the Central Valley. And after my first visit to the cave, my brother the next weekend said, "Hey, we drove down that little road and I ran the river down below that we had seen below." And little did I know that place would draw me in, and falling in love with it very, very slowly just transformed me and really helped me sort of come of age in a culture that we don't have, in my generation, there were, coming of age, we don't have that many, didn't have that many thoughts about it, but it did that to me, through me, with me, for me. It, my relationship with the river, as it grew and deepened, became like every of the most intimate human relationships one ever has. It became that, from from parent to teacher to mentor to spiritual guru to, and eventually to child, as its fate had been decided years before by people who on books said, "Hey, there's a blank spot on this map, great place to build a dam." And as I was involved in some of the first river running days and watched it transform people who paid to go down the river, then a friend had the idea of taking inner city kids down. So we watched it completely transform as we got donated old equipment and took these kids down the river. It transformed people's lives. And there's a place on a river. If you've ever been down a river, there's a place called a tongue, where the river narrows, and there's a big glossy green tongue or brown tongue, depending on the water. And once you enter the tongue, you can't go back because the river is narrowed, and so you get swept into the tongue. Well, in '73, Jerry Merrill said, "Hey, we're going to do this thing called a statewide initiative. How'd you like to coordinate Sacramento?" "Oh, sure, a couple hours a day." Well, by saying yes to him, I got swept down into the tongue of river politics. So I saw the river less and less as I started trying to learn to navigate the corridors of politics, of state politics, of of Washington and all of that. But what I'll go back to is one of the key lessons I learned from the river. Is my first year, I ended up breaking 7 oars because I was really strong. And so when I was being pulled the wrong direction, I would pull so strong I broke the oars. The next year, I learned how to dance with the currents. And so for me, when you're playing with really powerful forces, way more powerful than you are, you get to learn to dance with them. If you fight and struggle, you lose. And to me, this human journey, we've all inherited fighting and struggling, and yet the river of life is always moving downstream. And we humans have not yet matured as much to learn to dance with these powerful forces. And that doesn't mean you won't get wrapped on a rock or you might get flipped. But once that happens, okay, now what? It's like, if you spend your time panicked, it doesn't help very much.
Mhm.
So realigning to, okay, what's next and how do we do this is one of those really powerful lessons from the river. And I still keep trying to, I remember as I walked the corridors of Sacramento and these old curmudgeons were trying to do it the old way, I realized, with the rock, you never get mad at a sharp rock, you just learn to dance around it. And it eventually gets swept downstream around it. And yet learning that lesson from the river, it was easier to get mad at them rather than it was to learn to dance with them and dance with the currents that are going to leave them stuck in the river upstream. So anyway, a few little lessons from the river, many more lessons, but those are a few. So
Beautiful.
Yeah, it reminds me of the teachings of the Tao Te Ching of just be like water. Water will always find a way. Yeah. So Mark, you gained unplanned national notoriety, a few decades, 4 decades ago, 1979, when your beliefs or your passions, your courage was just phenomenal, where you wanted to stop the destruction of the river. And before we talk about it, I put together some screenshots on a day I mentioned, because there's a film called, the 11-minute film, The Voice of a River, that's about what you did. So I want to just share that with people, and then we can talk. Let's see, I can get the screen share going. Let's see, yeah, so I'll just get that. So up on the, here we go. The first picture is you, looks like being interviewed on CBS, May 25th, 1979. There's you a few decades ago, talking to an interviewer. And, oops, what did I do? Okay.
I was in the middle of the night, so that's my excuse for looking so funny. But
yeah, and there you are, chained to the rock.
The bedrock of the canyon.
Yeah, and then the close-up of your being chained to the rock looks like you're wearing some sort of foot device.
It's just a sock, because I decided I didn't want to have a metal chain around my leg. I thought I'd slightly protect it with a sock, but
yeah. Yeah, and then an article in the LA Times about what you were doing. Icy waters, lapid feet of man chained to rock. And it said, Army hunts reservoir foe. Oh, you were an enemy combatant, I guess, right? Terrorist. And there's Walter Cronkite, talking about you also. And
The slides aren't moving forward.
What's that?
You're still looking at the chain.
The slides aren't moving.
Oh, do you see? What do you see? Okay.
The
My chained foot.
Okay, then I have to, okay, now I got to go back again. So I'll just slowly do this. There's Walter Cronkite talking about you on national TV. So there you were. And nowadays people become celebrities from that, and then they'll go on, all the TV shows and write a book. But I think your integrity didn't allow you to parlay that into a celebrity career, Mark.
I apologize for a few years, because I felt like I couldn't explain what I did, and I felt like if I had been smart enough, I would have learned how to make the system work by itself. And
yeah,
I wasn't smart enough, so I kept apologizing. But yeah.
And then this is an article from Daily Paper. I don't know if in Sacramento or Sonora, California, and it's a little bit cut off, but let's see. I didn't feel I would drown is what the quote from you. So yeah, that's all the pictures. So that's phenomenal. I mean, it was just phenomenal. How long were you chained to the rock?
I was there a week.
1 week.
Wow.
And did you ever feel like my life is over? I'm potentially could go back to my maker? I mean, you felt you
Well,
were quoted, I didn't feel I would drown, but well, let's tell the
yeah,
story that the Army Corps of Engineers was going to flood the river, right? Is that,
they were filling the reservoir, and they were now, the reservoir had filled very, very far. The whole lower river was now flooded. They were getting ready to violate a Supreme Court mandate. The state, years before, had said, by the way, Army Corps, we said we want the dam, but you don't have any need for the water. And until you can prove you do, this river is now so popular, we don't want it flooded. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court said, Army Corps, you have to do what the state wants. And the Army Corps was going, we're the Army Corps of Engineers, and we want to get this thing off our hands. And if we raise the water, test our turbines, then we can give it to the Bureau of Reclamation as planned, and we won't have to deal with it. So they were getting ready to violate the Supreme Court. But I think two vignettes. I don't remember, several years earlier, we had lost one more campaign, and we'd gone to the river to both mourn our loss and to plan what was next. Well, it was easy to mourn our loss, and we couldn't come up with an idea. We had tried everything, right? So we couldn't figure out what was next. So I don't know if I consciously put words on it, but that night, the next morning, that night, I think I must have unconsciously thought, it's time to move on, right? We've tried and tried and tried. Early the next morning, I go up and I go walking up Grapevine Gulch, and here I am, this cascading turquoise water falling down through the limestone cliffs, the grapevines reaching out. It was springtime, and the butterflies were flying and dancing, the water skeeters on the water. And in a moment, I felt the life of that place. And by now I had learned we weren't building this because we needed it. It was an old idea who had served many years before, but this dam wasn't needed. And as I felt the life of that place, I'm going, if I turn my back on this initiative, I'll be like the people in Germany who turned their back on having a hint of what Hitler was doing, but turned a blind eye. So I had no idea what I was going to do. I thought, well, maybe I'll go move boulders. They're dumping trucks half as big as a house, two of them every hour, to build the biggest earth-filled dam around. And I thought, well, I'll move rocks one at a time. And, so it was a crazy idea, and I knew it was sort of, I couldn't do much, but I don't know when the idea came that, okay, if you're going to flood 9 million years of evolution, you can take one more critter with you, because you don't care about this, all the life that's lived in this canyon that's evolved over the million of years. So you can take one more. So, it came not in a conscious way, but I think that, again, the people who climbed a redwood tree years before and said, you can't cut this tree, or the people who chained themselves in Corder Madera Creek to say you can't channelize and put this under concrete, those little news snippets planted some kind of a seed. And now it was my turn to figure out how to make a statement. So there's lots of, pieces of the journey, but at some point it's really clear to me, oh, this is the year I've got to do it. And do I really want to do this? This is the biggest decision of my life. And I took a long walk with around San Francisco with my feet in the water and go, okay, I guess I want, I have to do this. I don't have a choice. It's like, this life is too, if I'm gonna, if you want to cut off my hand, I'm gonna go, no, you're not. Well, the connection to the life of this place was vastly more than me. It's like whatever, and again, not having the words for that connection. But at some point I decided to do it. Well, Wednesday night, a friend comes in our researcher, and says, Mark, by Monday, the water is going to reach 808. They're going to be violating the Supreme Court mandate. And so in a panic, I'm trying to figure out I don't know how to attach myself to a boulder. And I don't want to commit suicide. I want them to consciously choose to do it. So anyway, I finally go to a hardware store and discover how you attached to bedrock. And I write my letter, and I now go deliver it to the Army Corps. And I drop off a CC with Jerry Brown, the new governor of California. And as I come out of his office, 6 months before, 24 people had marched from the lower Stanislaus that was now all flooded with a red wagon and a little toyon shrub. And 500 people had planted that toyon tree right outside the governor's window with Peter Bear, the senator who fathered the Wild and Scenic River Bill. And so this toyon tree was the only living thing now left from the lower canyon because the rest was flooded. So I went to pay homage to it after I dropped off my letters. And the most powerful experience in my life happened again in an instant. And in a moment, this little shrub had grown markedly. And as I felt its life, it's like, oh, it doesn't matter if I'm gone in a week or if I'm gone in 100 years. If I'm not afraid to speak for life with all of my life, it's like I just transcended any fear. So the rightness of what I was doing was the most extraordinary sensation I have ever experienced. And then I've continued to live the rest of my life in fear. Oh no, and I can't say it, I can't do it. But in that moment, I neither had a choice, but it was also the most right thing I've ever done. So once I got there, and when I got there and discovered, I mean, it was only 12 miles of reservoir that was flooded, but there was 100 miles of shoreline. And I figured they were going to probably find me. So I had a very short piece of chain, so they'd have trouble doing it. But I didn't know I'd be able to find a place that was underneath some shrubs. I could, when I heard motorboats and helicopters come, I could hide under the rock. And I wasn't waving, saying, here I am. I would disappear. And they were going 20 miles an hour or flying over. So they said, oh, we can't find him. So after a couple days, the water was rising the first day. And later I learned that my letter had hit Washington and our friends. And so there was some interesting conversations, and the Army Corps was forced to back down and not flood me, even though for me, they were finally abiding by the Supreme Court mandate and they weren't flooding the Upper Canyon. So anyway, so once I was there, it didn't matter, but the water dropped and I could barely reach the scuzzy reservoir water to get a drink. So it was the most interesting, quietest week of my life, except I've never been prey before. And it was interesting to feel the panic of being sought out by people who may not have good intentions for you or my intentions. So anyway, so that's those are hints of the interesting week of watching the sunrise and the sunset, learning the critters all had their time of day. I always like moving, and I'd never been in one place so long. And the lizards came out on the big rock across me every day at a certain time. And the beaver came out at a certain time. The otter that we didn't even know were there came out at a certain time. It took me 3 days to finally hear that little sound behind me. It was a little shrew that poked his head out. And anyway, it was an amazing, quiet week, except for those little punctuations of human activity in search. So yeah.
What a story. And what a world that goes on every day in these wild places, whether it's a river or a forest or a mountaintop or a valley. The creatures that live there and have their little habits every day and interacting, we're oblivious to that unless someone does something like what you do and they plop themselves down in it and become a part of it. I'm reminded of something by Eric Jantz, who's a systems theorist that I'm fond of. And he talks about 3 levels of systems, 3 ways of thinking: a rational, a mythic, and an evolutionary. And he talks about it in terms of a river, that the rational system is measuring the river and what's the temperature and how many fish go there and what's the rise and fall in different seasons. And that's our rational thing. We're outside of it. And, it's a thing, it's a I-it relationship. And then he talks about at some point, if you're, looking at it closely enough, you fall in the river. And then it's no longer the fact that the river's 55 degrees or it's going 20 knots an hour or whatever. You are in an experience, and then you're in an I thou experience. You're realizing that the river is a living entity, a divine being, if you will, and then the third level, after you have the I thou experience, is the we, when you and the river are not separate. And that is where we are co-generating a course for the river. And so your environmental and political fight was the we, because you'd already had the I thou experience with the river. And so all of that thinking is just resonating as I hear your amazing story.
Yeah.
Thank you for that that lens, because it's Michael, you said I did something heroic, and I didn't feel heroic at all. Like I said, I felt, I'm just not smart enough to make the system do what it's legally supposed to do. And you beautifully captured beyond the I thou. It was, it is me. It wasn't. At one point, John Garamendi had convened all the farmers in Ripon, California to have a hearing, and it was red meat time. He was really going to have a hearing on New Melones. And so I went there with a couple friends, and we sat in the back, and he made sure I had to listen to all the farmers rant. And then I got up and spoke about the river as best I could. And it was mostly through sort of boos and hisses. But afterwards, one farmer came up to me, and you could tell he was something of a peacemaker. And he goes, well, when I listen to you, I can tell that if they were going to if somebody was going to flood my farm, I would fight for it. And I said, well, that's beautiful. And for me, if I could never, ever go there again, I would be fighting just as hard. Because you captured the we, it was beyond my home. It was, yeah.
Yeah. And another story of this is, with the Army Corps of Engineers trying to flood the waters, is just how arrogant we are as Homo sapiens in terms of how we feel we can dominate nature and push nature, shape nature into what we want nature to be. I mean, you're weak with the animals within nature, reminds us of how we're removed from nature. We don't even think about nature, but yeah, we just allow, and now we're seeing the end progression of it, of climate change, occurring more rapidly with extreme weather, as we continue to just push nature into, as if it's our little plaything to do what we want with. And,
well, my sense is we so inherited a disconnection from this sacred earth. We're doing the Army Corps was doing the best they knew how, right? It's like, because wow, we'll make the deserts bloom, and there wasn't anyone saying, how do we live in reverence with this miracle that's already giving life, and how do we now collaborate with it, rather than I own it, it's my slave, it's my, whether the river's my slave, or we got rid of slavery kind of, but anyway, we inherited that which we did, that amputated our genius from our hearts and our guts and our connection to the divine. And so we now get to co-create futures that work, and we get to do it as we remember our connection, because if you inherit disconnection, you're doing the best you can with that disconnection. And so how to honor everyone's doing the best they knew how, and we now get to tease out of each other the visions and the dreams, that are meant to come now. So
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what do you, I mean, we were talking even before we started this call, just in the few minutes we had, about the despair for the earth and what's happening. And so many people are feeling that. So many people are frightened. What can we do about something as big as climate change? What can we do? I mean, there's so much loss that is looking like we're going to have to go through. And I don't mean just the loss of human life. I mean the loss of habitats, the loss
yeah,
of forests that are going up in flames, and
the
planes that
species.
are flooding. And, we know, I think everybody listening knows all this
Yeah.
stuff. So how do you find a hope? Are you discouraged? Are you encouraged? Where do you fall in that spectrum? And
Well, I think I'll offer two things in this moment. One of them is that having the privilege of coordinating Earth Day's international efforts, and that's a misnomer. Coordinating was not it, right? We were holding an invitation, we sent it out, and then we creatively made sure we got back to people, and the response from around the world blew us away. And so what I experientially know is that in every single country of the world, despite no educated middle class, despite no democracy, despite no money, there are people in every single country of the world who are working to help their village, their community, their nation live in more alignment and more integrity. And they're using all their creativity. When I started International Rivers Network, a man from Colombia said, "Oh, I've lost many friends, so I no longer protest my government." Well, everything he told us after that, he was creatively finding a way to help his government grow. So despite all the odds, there are people in every single country that they're turning the lights on, and they're being a voice creatively for the emergent that is coursing through all of us. So my optimism comes from, it's, well, maybe I'll again share the other lesson from River. To be running rivers is a class 1 to class 6 schedule, scale of rivers. So class 1, flat water. Class 2, a canoe might tip over. Class 6, you die. You don't run a class 6 because you die. A class 5 is very dangerous. You can easily die. So to become a class 5 boater, you have to not only be good with your craft, but you have to know how to read all the water. So to a novice, what looks like complete chaos, when you learn to read the water that's right in front of our eyes, you learn how to read the gargantuan hole that will eat you and everybody in the boat, or the shredder rock just under the surface. It will shred things apart. And then you have to look and see all the small things, because if you don't see them, you'll hit them and spin you into the bigger obstacles. Well, also what makes a good class 5 boater is if you focus on the obstacles, they become magnets. And so then what you do is you learn to see it all, large and small, and then you put all your attention on the through line. Where's the current going that I have the best chance of doing this? So, and the corollary is that if we're paddling, if somebody on the other side of my boat does something I don't understand, instead of wasting my time getting mad at them, I have to trust that they could see something that I couldn't see. So how do I trust their seeing? And if on my side of the boat, I make a mistake, instead of people wasting time getting mad at me, now we're going backwards. Where's the through line? So rather than pointing fingers, where's the through line? And together we have to keep aiming for the through line. And we're going to make mistakes because we have never been here before. So for me, humanity is in the midst of the biggest transformation we've ever been in. It's a class 5. It could easily be a class 6. We may not survive it, but now we're all in this together. And the people who are in denial, oh, they're hoping somebody else is looking. Those who are looking they can feel the consequences. Their intuition knows destruction is right around the bend or right in front of us. And we don't yet have enough maturity to go, okay, and where's the through line? Where's the through line? How do we focus together on the through line? So let's not waste time pointing fingers and blaming. And as I heard Paul Hawken do a presentation on his new book yesterday, I just felt like he is masterfully reminding people to focus on regeneration. Where's the through line? Don't focus on climate change because then we're going to fight them. And, we all voted for the oil companies, most of us did, or we voted for whoever the thems are. They only exist because we spent our dollars with them. And yeah, so how do we mature to focus on the through line? So what gives me optimism is I look at how many people are beginning to live their lives focused on what can I do? They've been looking at how huge the holes are or how dangerous what's ahead. And they're going, well, here's my piece. And I'm going to do something even if I don't know what to do. And before long, they're surrounded by other people. There's a team of people, and they're starting to create through lines for humanity past what appear to be all of these obstacles that we're collectively kind of knowing and seeing, and we sometimes want to avoid looking at, but more and more people are choosing to focus. So feeling us being in humanity's greatest emergence, where we're beginning to shift from operating from fear to operating from love. And operating in love doesn't mean it will be painless. And yet, oh, that didn't work. Now what? Oh, that didn't work. Now what? And so rather than, oh, no, that didn't work, gaining the maturity to go, what's downstream? What's coming next? How do I learn from how do we learn from what was just upstream of us? So those are things that feed my optimism, is feeling that change. And all around the world, I just keep seeing more and more people from all these different sectors doing the inner work, learning to live more and more in integrity and in alignment. And it's happening on the micro and on the macro level all over, and it's under the media's radar, and yet it's going on, and the groundswell is shifting all around us. So yeah.
That's beautiful, the through line. I love that. And the through line in some ways is a future in which we can thrive, and a future in which we live in harmony and balance with nature.
Right.
And we aren't going to thrive without that. And the contact with it is what makes you realize that. I feel like that's as powerful as sitting and closing my eyes in meditation when I go out in the backyard and I look out. I live over a river. I look out at a river, the Novato River, the Petaluma River that goes into the bay is where I live, and I look at it every day. And I've lived here 8 years, and every day it's a little different. The clouds are different, the birds are different, the water level's a little different, the lights on it different, and it's a relationship, and it reminds us of what's eternal. And we are very temporary. Gaia has been around, life, first cells of life were 3.8 billion years ago, and humans have only been here a few million. And, we're the newcomers in the evolutionary journey. And nature has been practicing for a long time and has worked out a lot of these relationships, full recycling, full employment, no one goes hungry. Except where humans have interfered. And it will, if we don't make it and we're long gone, nature will reassert herself. But it'll take a long time.
Yeah.
And it's really our choice. Do we align with something that's sustainable, which is nature? it's not just about being sustainable, it's about aligning with that. Or do we align with things that are temporary fixes, making more money, having more possessions, having more power, whatever you want to say is that paradigm? What do we align with?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to say, nature doesn't need us to continue and survive, but we need nature, and that's the key lesson. Will we understand that and surrender at times to what nature's
Yeah.
needs are?
And I would also offer that we get to, there's the language of we have to. Well, yeah, we have to, but we get to, we get to come alive and really discover the fullness of who we're meant to be in these times. You asked my optimism earlier, and again, I'll say that the other part to me is in my growing up, the Vietnam War for 7 years, my dad was our country right or wrong for 6 years. And then my dad got quiet for a year. And, the microphones of the military were as loud as possible for, we got to get the gooks. And then, boop, the consensus stopped within a year. When growing up again, the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain was reality. That was the only reality existing. And then within a week, both fell. They literally fell. And when in Pachamama, there's an interview with Desmond Tutu, and he kept saying that when apartheid ends, but they have all the guns and all the power. What was he thinking? But in 8 months, it fell. Huge changes happen when we can least see them. No one can predict them. Charles Eisenstein has a line that a miracle is not a supernatural event. When you're on the other side, you look back and you realize it was inevitable. So to me, those who are going, this is going to take a miracle for humanity to wake up. Well, we're all slowly awakening, and we don't know what the turning point can be that has all of us, instead of wasting our time polarizing and pointing fingers and blaming and being in denial. Wow, what's your part of the great emergence? What's your part of this great turning? What's your part of this shift? So we get to co-create with each other. So to me, whether it's 3 months, 3 years, no, I hope not 30 years, but we are in the middle of this great awakening, and we just can't see it. And well, it may look like a miracle. It will be the miracle that's happened throughout human evolution where, oh, let's do it differently because that clearly wasn't working. So
Yeah.
That's beautiful. It's like a birth. In systems theory and evolutionary theory, disturbances to the system are what make it evolve. And that because the system can't deal with this disturbance in its current level of organization, it has to evolve to a higher level of organization in order
right.
to withstand the disturbance. And so they're evolutionary drivers, is what Barbara Marx Hubbard used to call them.
Yeah.
And climate change to me is an evolutionary driver toward global cooperation because it's the only way it's going to be solved. And we probably wouldn't do it otherwise.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what country you're in. It doesn't matter rich or poor, although it does hit the poor harder. Everything does.
Yeah.
It's climate change is going to hit us all, and it's going to force a global reorganization. So that's my way of
Yeah.
looking at it positively. That this disturbance is necessary, and it's to the degree it takes to get humanity to reorganize, and we won't do it when things are going well.
Well, I'll say the one slight challenge with that is you said when, and the New York Times pointed out that 1/3 of Americans have now been directly impacted by climate crisis. And so to me, it's like the crisis has been going on. If you look at endangered species, if you look at the crisis has been coming, and there is some part of that frog in the pond. If it jumps into hot water, it jumps out. But if it jumps into slowly, so I'm intrigued with again yes, it can take. Paul was recently interviewed, and they said, well, Paul, aren't you disappointed when you did drawdown that things didn't change right away? And he goes, I've always known. And he just repeated yesterday that we've known that until it impacts people, they don't feel it, they won't move. And it's like, you know, why have we closed our hearts down not to feel the other species, these places? You know, all of our lives, all around us is paved over, and yet that's progress. And so what opens us, how do we get to learn to be so open that we can feel the crisis that's been with us already? And how do we help our neighbors who just want to go back to normal, where it was safe to keep consuming and keep letting racism run rampant? And what helps open the doors of all of us and our hearts to play now. So, and yes to Barbara's evolutionary drivers. So
Yeah.
Mark, I want to ask you, you have a phrase, alchemizing our fear. You talk about the shift of operating from love while alchemizing our fear. So I'm wondering if you could say more about that concept, alchemizing our fear.
well, I probably drew on the language when I had the privilege of connecting and marrying Claire, who started Tree Sisters. So Claire, to me, is a walking transmission. And part of it is because she has her heart so open that she feels it all, right? When she had just driven through Colorado and watched all the trees dying. She had been there 6 months before. 6 months later, the trees are dying. Nobody's talking about it. And so she jumps on a plane and she's just brokenhearted because she posted it, and her friends throughout the Rockies were going, it's happening here too, it's happening here too. And so she got on the plane, and right across from her is Barbara. And she goes, but Barbara was sleeping. And when Barbara woke up, she goes, oh, Claire. And Claire was just sobbing with tears. And Barbara's line was, Claire, you have to develop your intimacy with the evolutionary impulse. And Claire got that. But with that, my experience of watching Claire, who feels the pain around the world, we're knowing that when people feel pain, they can go in and they can wallow in it. Claire doesn't just wallow in it. She dives to the depth of it, and she alchemizes it, and she becomes more fierce. She becomes more like a lioness or a bear that goes, not on my watch. And so I think that experiencing pain, I don't want to experience pain because it's too painful, right? We know not to stick our finger in the fire, so we avoid pain. And we've closed our hearts down to avoid pain. And to be fully human, we get to open our hearts and feel all those things and not stay stuck in the loop and the wallowing, but to dive in it so deeply that it burns, it alchemizes, like when they temper metal, it burns so hot that it's now a part of us, and we become more connected voices and transmissions for the love and beauty that is all around us, this magic and miracle that we're in. And so I'm still trying to figure out, how do we alchemize this pain and make us become more fierce warriors or more fierce midwives? And warriors, not in the sense of fighting, but in the sense of a Gandhian, I'm not here to fight you, and I'm not going away. And I'm here to bring out the best of you. No matter what you're ready to do to me, I'm here because I'm here for life, for all of life, for our children and our, for 70 generations, not just 7. So learning to alchemize that pain and grief and coming out the other side. And it may not, being around Claire, it doesn't look pretty, and she cries every day because her heart is so open. and she just becomes more and more of a clear transmission. So that's somewhat what I mean by alchemizing that pain and grief and anger into turning into raw, pure clarity for what's needed now.
And thank you for that. And just for those who don't know, your wife Claire started Tree Sisters, which is a tree planting organization. And right now, starting Friday, you can check it out at the Shift Network. There is a 3-day music and visionary festival. They have lots of musicians playing and visionaries talking. I'm giving a 30-minute presentation on it Sunday morning. And the idea of this is to raise money for Tree Sisters to plant 1 million trees. So they're going to donate all their money, and the presenters are also donating money. I donated some, and after talking to you, I'm going to go donate some more. So tune into that and donate to the Tree Sisters to plant 1 million trees.
And I'll just
really
say,
good.
Tree Sister, I mean, Shift has really gotten Claire's transmission of how do we move from consumers to restorers. So they now understand, like the people around the world who give money monthly know that we all generate carbon, and trees are the best technology for sequestering carbon. So people all around the world give monthly to offset our carbon use. And it's beautiful that Shift Network, Stephen and Deva have really gotten, how do we now make this so that all of our speakers now become regenerators? So when you have a conference, how do you have some of your money going back into restoring? So it's it's really beautiful what they're doing and how much they get shifting, being a part of shifting to being all of us being restorers. So good reminder.
Restorative and regenerative. And you write about regenerative economics, don't you, Michael?
I finished the book and probably come out in the winter. But which reminds me, you were talking about something, and with an economic note to it. Yesterday, you said something, Mark, that reminded me. Yesterday, the New York Times published an op-ed from a well-known conservative economist who was bashing the budget reconciliation bill in front of Congress, which would be, if it passes, and hopefully it will be a landmark in terms of setting up a civilian conservation corps and all these things that our society desperately needs. And he was saying in the article, the headline was something like "America doesn't need a welfare state," and he was saying, well, if we become like Europe, the United States, Europe's GDP is far less than America. America's economy is thriving. Europe is not. Their GDP is less, and that's the real problem economically, politically, spiritually. If the United States measures progress or are just moving forward by GDP, as this conservative economist is doing, we're just in bad shape. But if we look, in Europe, quality of life and levels of happiness, like the Global Happiness Report, the European countries are at the high levels of that report. And so, again, talking about economics, we have to shift the paradigm. And it's almost, kind of tying in with operating from love, what are the most important things of life? Having a happy life, having a good work-life balance, appreciating nature, or is it all GDP? Every time we destroy the environment, that's good for GDP.
Well, it is interesting to me that's gross national product, and it's gross, and gross has an interesting meaning. And yet, to mature our economic system is stealing from the future. So that tree that's been providing oxygen or fruit has no value unless you cut it. And so, the soil, unless you plow it up. Anyway, we've developed a whole economy based on GDP, but not valuing natural systems, the clean air, the clean water, that has no value. And so to me, in the middle of this wake up, in this middle of this huge emergence, that's clearly going to be one of the biggest shifts, is having an economy that serves life, not stealing from the future. The only, my family was Gold Rush family that came to California. And if you look at the only time America's gross national product had a decrease, it's gone consistently up. The only time it had a decrease was when they, in 1872 and 3, Sacramento kept getting flooded because the hydraulic miners were eating the mountains to get the gold from underneath. All that debris came down, filled in the riverbeds. The riverbeds were overflowing and flooding Sacramento. So they said, you can keep mining, but you can't have runoff. And because they stopped, and it didn't make economic sense to do runoff. So that's the only time. So they were stealing from everyone. They were flooding out everyone. And to me, California has one of the most amazing engines of growth all over. And yet our agriculture is based on mining the groundwater, stripping it, stripping our rivers, poisoning our soil. And so it's like, oh, we could have regenerative agriculture? It's what farmers have always known. And how do we have an economy that no longer steals from the future? So to me, we're really, the next generation knows this stuff. So you can have, the politicians who trained me were actually conservatives. They were Republicans who tutored me, but they were conservative in the old Pinchot, greatest good for the greatest number for the longest time. Now what we call these neocons are just allowing, they've normalized stealing from the future. And it's like, and so I don't know how do I get to learn how to speak to them on their values, because I know they have kids as well. And so I'm intrigued with what unleashes our creativity to speak to true conservatism. You're here for everyone. And as I thought about California's agriculture changing, as we ship beef all over, and it's like the use of water, we may have a dip in our short-term economics, but it's back to having an economy that serves and regenerates life on and on and on. And so it may look like an initial backward step, but it's putting us on real footing that we get to, the future generations will go, wow, how could they have done that for so long and been so blind? And yet that's now what we get to co-create.
It strikes me that we have Social Security, which takes money out of people's paychecks to make sure there's something for them when they get old. We could have a nature security where something is taken out to preserve nature for the future, because you wouldn't, everyone understands trying to save money for your old age if you possibly can. But to try to save nature for our future generations is what allows the human experience to continue.
Yeah.
And, if we had a tax that was a nature security that was put into protection and regeneration, that would go a long way.
I think those are the kind of things that are going to be coming, because it is just so crazy what we've considered normal. It's normal is plunder and separation and disconnection. And now, we're getting to wake up to, we do get to live with this sacred, precious earth and its verdance. This was such a verdant place before we modernized and disconnected and commodified. And again, there's so we're a lot of things we get to change and grow into.
Yeah, normal was the crisis.
Yeah.
And Adea, that was a great idea, really, really lovely idea. And it kind of made me think about Mark talking about creativity. A very creative idea. And that's what we have to unleash our powers of creativity, creative thinking, and all these ideas, and just move forward. And
Europe a number of years ago was doing a tax shift. So instead of taxing wages, they were going to tax material stuff. So that again, material stuff got more expensive, but you didn't tax labor, so you had more people employed, because employees can, oh, we can't afford to hiring more people. So doing that kind of a tax shift. And then Huey Johnson under Jerry Brown was the resource secretary, and he convinced the banks and all these other people that the offshore oil money should be invested in the water, the soil, the air, the fisheries, because he said money doesn't grow on trees. Money is generated from these things. And when the Republicans got in after him and they tried to get rid of that, to siphon the money off, the banker said, you can't do that, because Huey had educated them enough that where does money really come from? And it comes from a healthy environment. So yes, to your beautiful idea. And yeah, there's all these ideas of helping accelerate the shift. So let them come.
I've always thought that we should create a Matriot Act, which would be the counter to the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act said, there was this terrible threat, and if we didn't take all our resources to combat it, we'd be in trouble. Well, the Matriot Act says the threat to Mother Earth is the greatest threat to our national and international security, and the greatest threat to our future as a species. And if we don't say, listen, we need to put everything, our brightest minds, our mega monies toward protecting this, then it's going to be like a world war. And to avoid that, we need to preserve the mother, the Matriot Act.
I love it. Yeah. Genius idea.
Let's work on it together, Mark.
I'm looking forward to that. The only addition I'd say is that, to me, knowing you talked about optimism, in World War II, within 1 year, milkmaids were Rosie the Riveter. Farm lads were fighter pilots. Grandmothers were doing victory gardens. 80% of America's veggies came out of victory gardens of grandmothers. Young kids were out harvesting all the old nails and farm equipment for the war effort. So in 1 year, our nation completely turned around. And it was easy to do it when we were fighting them. And so with your Matriot Act, how do we align all of us, not only our best minds and all the best money, but every single one of us who sees whatever part of the world they're in and can help this shift so that we grow us all and we all become aligned with, yes, living with this sacred Mother Earth. Beautiful idea. Definitely working with you on that.
Great.
Yeah. So with all these good ideas and with hearing what you did, a few decades ago, people watching this, whether live or watching our recording, are going to say, well, I'm not going to chain myself to a rock. I may not be ready. But what could people do? Okay, what can I do and others do in big ways and small ways?
To me, what I've always sensed is the most important thing is for each of us to follow our hearts. And it feels like we've been trained away from that. And to me, until we open up our hearts and our passion, we're going to lose. If we're doing what we think we should do, it doesn't work. And if anybody can tell you, here's what you should do, well, when our love animates us, we have no idea where it will take us, and we have no idea what creativity will be unleashed. Michael Dowd came up with a simple exercise. Draw a piece of line down the middle of the paper, and on one side write my greatest joy. And so without thinking, just write, what do I love doing? When does time disappear? What makes me come alive? And just write and write and write and write. And when it slows down, no, you can always add to it. And then the other side, write the world's greatest needs. Don't think about headlines, but what most breaks my heart, what shatters me, what makes me weep, what makes me want to hit somebody, what makes me angry. And again, the world's greatest needs from my unique lens, and write. And so have that list always handy. Keep being ready to add to it, and occasionally look at it and find and see if you occasionally can figure out where my greatest joy and the world's greatest needs meet. And he said, within 3 months to 3 years, we'll find our life's mission. And so to me, we've been trained against, if I look at what I love, that's being hedonistic. If I look at the pain of the world, I'm being a masochist. And yet each of us are such a unique antenna. To transform this world, it's going to take more and more of us finding where our heart's unique antenna is, and then unleashing our hearts and creativity and passion for that element of this great conundrum that we're all in the middle, and this incredible opportunity we're in the middle of shifting and co-creating literally heaven on earth. So yeah.
That's a beautiful exercise. I love that.
Yeah.
Michael, should we open it up to see if any of the participants want to ask any questions?
Yeah. And while we wait to see, I saw that Grace had raised her hand. So Grace, if you want to put a question, if you had a question, put a question in the Q&A or in the Q&A or chat box. I just want to point out at the end of the short film about what you did on the river, the voice of a river, it ends with Margaret Mead's famous saying that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that it ever has. So, I mean, I think that was relevant to what you did with chaining yourself, stopping. So are you a firm believer of what Margaret Mead said?
The truth of it is beyond, I mean, my whole life, every change that I've ever known about happened because of what Margaret Mead said. One or two or three people said, that shouldn't happen. And they got together, and all of a sudden, it's like the women who did suffrage. They didn't get to see it in their lifetime, but they knew that equality, men shouldn't be the only ones voting, right? And it unleashed their creativity and voices around. And every change that we now take for granted, I mean, women don't even appreciate the chance to vote necessarily, but every change that we take as normal came about because one or two or three people said, wait a second, not on my watch. So yeah, Margaret Mead captured it. And I'll say one of the biggest challenges to me that we faced, we inherited victimhood. And whether it be our parents or our teachers or our bosses or the police or corporations, we've all given our power away. And we love being victims. That line from Marianne Williamson, we far more fear our light than our shadow, because and when we live our light, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. But we love the self-fulfilling prophecy. If I don't have any power, because they have all the power, so we give it all away. And I don't know what helps us transcend that, right? I mean, because we are told not to pay attention to what I love and don't pay attention to the painful because I can't do anything about it. And to me, in this great emergence, we're waking up to, we have more agency than we ever were told. That we don't have to believe all the, some young kid wrote this beautiful poem about, when I was young, you asked me, what I wanted to be, and I told you. And the rest of the time you told me, oh, you can't do that. Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. So how do we now let all of us of all generations dream, dare to dream? What's that line that says, we're never given a dream without also being given the capacity to make it become so. Mm-hmm. And so to me, now is the time we get to unleash our dreams and our creativity and co-create together and find partners who resonate. And then, in a river, if you go up to the high Sierra, the rocks are really sharp. But when you get down to the valley, they're all rounded. So in learning to collaborate, we sort of keep bumping shoulders. So to me, in the evolutionary flow, we're still bumping shoulders with our sacred neighbors, left or right, or whatever we've created other. But slowly we now get to learn to dance and see other people's views and learn from their seeing and look for the through lines together.
Oh, that's beautiful. Very beautiful. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
those
I
are,
think that victimization, some people even feel like they're victimized by being told to wear a mask. It's just, reached a ridiculous level and it's very childish. And I think the great growing up is that we no longer accept the victimhood and we take action or we take responsibility.
Well, and yeah, and taking responsibility, and there's it feels like, I mean, we inherited a sort of I mean, a John Wayne, I'm my own, and we're all in this together. So I think, I mean, and probably one of my greatest challenges is, how do I seek out the people who clearly have very different beliefs than I, and how do I learn to engage, not in a judgmental, oh, look at them, but how do I learn to listen to their wisdom? Because they clearly can see something that I'm not seeing. In all of the campaigning I did, when a colleague and I were on the most extreme opposite ends, and we would always fight at our meetings. But when we went to Washington, I, who could speak to heart, and he who could speak to economics and facts and figures, we surrounded the congressman because there was no place for him to go. So together, as opposites, we were much more powerful than I could be speaking to one, to one part of them. And so to me, we get to, again, in looking for the through line, we are paddling this together. So how do we invite ourselves to find the other neighbor and know that if I have an other in my vocabulary or attitude, I lose out and we lose out. So how do we learn to seek out those who hold a different perspective and engage in a conversation beyond shame and blame and demeaning, and tease out each other's wisdom? And once we feel heard, then we can do more together. So opportunities abound.
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Michael, you're having someone speak to us on Voices of the Future that deals exactly with that, right?
Oh, with finding common ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, at October 28th, we're going to be talking with David Nevins, who's the co-founder and chairman of the board of the Bridge Alliance, which is a major organization, nonpartisan organization, trying to find common ground
Beautiful.
with all the various sectors in the political spectrum.
There are people pioneering those kind of, I mean, Joan Blades did
Yeah, she's part
her
of it.
conversation, living room conversations,
Yeah.
getting people from different, so there's people pioneering these kind of conversations, and boy, do we need it to help transcend this muddle of wasting our time in shame and blame. So
Totally. So
beautiful,
we have a
great.
question. Oh, sorry. We do have a question from Grace Denise. I'll just read it verbatim. She wrote, how about all movers for the good coming together in various platforms to create a movement? What about funding a positive force radio station? And how do we create international cooperation so no country suffers from change from fossil fuels? All these issues are interrelated. Yeah.
Indeed, they're all interrelated. Because of Earth Day and working with these thousands of groups and all around the world, part of what made our success was we didn't tell people to come to us. We said, here's their, I mean, very few had emails in the first day, but here's their phone numbers, addresses, and faxes. And so people started cross-pollinating. So we so powerfully experienced what happens when people come together and start. My optimism came from, it was like the opposite of a feeding frenzy. Oh, they're doing that, well, we could do this. And so it was a competition where everybody got better and better. So the value and need for that would serve our emergence tremendously. And I've been around a number of experiences where people say, oh, if we just had this platform, and yet everyone creates their platform. So yes to all people who have that idea. and is also is happening all around us. That, so yeah, everything she said, yes to those impulses of, how do we help make sure that the nations that are being wiped out by global warming and otherwise, their voices are heard more loudly, and how do we do collaborations? And there's a World System Solutions is trying to create that kind of a platform right now, and so people have had the impulse, and yet we're still, whether it be too large or too amorphous, or again so yes to the impulse, and yes to collaboration, even if the system doesn't get in place. How do we find the circles we can do with larger and larger circles, and grounded and rooted in what we're doing in our own backyard and our global backyard?
Yeah, and our common ground.
Common ground, yes. Search for common ground is another circle of people who've been bringing opposites together. So I don't know if you've had them on already as well, but they're another remarkable circle bringing opposites together.
Yeah, because you bring people together, not necessarily going to agree on everything, but to hear each other and find where the common solutions lie, and each person's wisdom in that regard. And that, that moves us away from that competitiveness to collaborative nature.
Yeah.
And that, the laws of evolution, and Darwin himself was stated that humans, the laws of evolution show that humans and more complex organisms collaborate at the higher levels and don't compete.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Somehow, how come our textbooks miss that out, or our modern paradigm sort of hasn't quite remembered that?
Well, even Darwin was misinterpreted, because he wrote about love and cooperation more than he wrote survival of the fittest. He didn't even come up with that phrase. That was Herbert Spencer.
Right.
And so he's been misinterpreted, and people have talked about this competitive survival, but that's not how nature works.
No.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where, in this great emergence, we're learning that. Thriving together. I still think of, in the old days, when I took the last cookie when no one was looking, and then I shared the last cookie with 5 people, and I know which one tasted better. I will never ever have to take the last cookie when no one's looking, but I had to make that mistake. And slowly, to me, we're learning, when we come together, we're far more effective than when we try to do it on our own, or when we dismiss others. So
yeah, and it's going from scarcity to abundance, and even in economics, it talks about that. John Maynard Keynes talked about a post-scarcity society towards a age of abundance. So
right.
It's getting away from that.
I would just say or add that one of the lessons from the river for me is, my first year I had a big dry bag with all my clothes, and by the end of the year I realized I never used half of them. So the next year I took a really small one, and all I had was my sleeping bag and a ground cloth and a t-shirt. And so in the morning I'd go off and go take a look and exploring. When I came back, people were still stuffing all the stuff they thought they needed. So I really discovered less is more. And so, in an abundance, how do we live not in scarcity? And it's like, and that doesn't mean to live in poverty, but how do we get to learn, the less we have, the richer we can be, because we get to be with this sacred earth and with each of our neighbors. So living in abundance is it different than more stuff that I need to lock my doors with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have another question from Grace, and then I guess we'll start winding down. Grace asked, another great question from Grace: how can we create for the common good in the long term and also preserve democracy when so many forces are opposing it today? Yeah, that's the big kahuna.
Well, like I mentioned about the beginning, the protests of the Vietnam War, the protests were really small and they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And, before it ended, the military's microphones about the war's importance were louder than ever before. And then it ended. And so it does feel to me like we're going through the patriarchies, the last gasp in all of these different countries around the world. People are giving their power away to, the top-down linear top dog who can save us. And for me, it's likely just a sign that we're getting closer and closer to, your your war for the earth. But we have to try everything before we realized how absurd it is. So as we try these in all these different countries where people have given their power away, my sense is those will melt as people find their voices and speak from love rather than fighting the old systems. We get to speak from a different way. So it's in the process of happening, even if we can't see it. And so rather than fighting against the old systems, we get to find our voices. The recent research is more and more documented. Erica Chuenowicz completely documented that if you want to get revolutionary change, if you do it nonviolently, it happens 7 times faster than if you do it with violence and with guns. And it's like, we inherited thinking that guns are more powerful. And we haven't really comprehended that our hearts are vastly more powerful. And so, as we learn that from experience, and, again, the people who have stood without a gun in front of guns, some have died and some have been hurt. And yet Gandhi, to me, pioneered this way of, I'm not here to fight you, and I'm not going, and I'm here to support you being your best. And as we 150 years later learn the depth and the roots of what he was actually practicing, then we help transform the world much more quickly, and the old structures will melt, because the beauty of what's meant to be is so much more powerful as we live it.
Yeah. So we have
actually an organizing principle.
Yeah. So we have another question from Jean, and I just want to add on to what you said, Mark, when you mentioned Erica Chenoweth, because she came up with the concept of the 3.5% the 3.5% rule, that nonviolent movements succeed when 3.5% of a population are part of it. So it's
so it doesn't take that much to make the change.
Yeah. So Jean asks, Indigenous people have had some success defending resources by giving them status and therefore rights as living beings. Can that work here in the US?
It's the only thing that will, right? We've given authority to people and to corporations, and not to the earth. It's like that which has nourished us and has made life more verdant. So, it feels like we're finally coming full circle. Our Western minds came and conquered Indigenous, and now Indigenous is re-rising because of their connection with this earth. And so, while the language still doesn't make sense in English, what do you mean rights of rivers? It's like new concept. It's like women having the right to vote. What are you thinking? And so the earth having rights, fisheries having rights. Well, you care more about people or fish? Well, when the fish die, like the canary, when they died, the miners knew to leave. When the fish die, we die. So we're slowly waking up to, and Indigenous people are gifting us with something new, ancient concepts that are what we inherited didn't quite grok yet, and we're slowly get to understand, and we'll be changing. Our systems are going to change because they've taken us as far as they can. So we need emergent systems and laws that see our world in a very different way. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful reminder. And yes, rights of rivers and rights of nature, and rights of trees. And slowly it's it may sound chaotic from an old paradigm, and yet it's the living emergent that will be our norm as time unfolds here.
Yeah, and as you point out, here we are, we're giving corporations personhood. So yeah,
to do whatever they want.
Yeah, crazy.
And corporations are made of people who have children as well. So this shift is occurring. More and more companies, they don't want to be the ones who on their watch, plundered everything. And so, but they inherited a system. The whole stop ego side is changing the basic ground rules so that, a lot of CEOs who were just eating out of Polly Higgins' hand when she gave them this opportunity, because they knew they could go to the board and go, hey, you guys, this new law is happening. We're going to have to change. And they could go to their kids and go, my company is no longer stealing from the future. So people all over are wanting the shifts to happen. And we inherited old systems that we get to accelerate changing now.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we could go on much longer. And thank you, Mark. I guess we'll wind it down. And
Yeah, what a beautiful conversation, and what a beautiful contribution to the future that you are, and to standing for what will enable us to have a future, which is the ground of nature. And what a beautiful voice for the river, for the trees, for the forest, for the land that you have been in your life in every way. And thank you for gracing us with your presence today.
thank you, Mark.
Well, again, thank you guys for holding and hosting this conversation exploration about, the future. As I say, too much is focused on what's going wrong, and teasing out those who are pioneering voices for the future. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for gifting the world.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Mark, for your life and inspiration for what you stand for. Yeah. Okay.
Again, deep, deep gratitude.
Yeah.
So this is Voices for the Future. I think our next speaker will be Susan Campbell, right? Talking about communication.
And relationships too, I think.
And
October
relationships.
7th.
I don't have that date in front of us, but you'll hear from us. And then we have the person talking about bridging the gap.
The Bridge Alliance. Yeah.
Oh, yay. Yay.
So thank you, Mark, and hope we can tune in with you again. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart to yours for your time today.
Yeah.
And blessings on Claire and the 1 million trees, and may we all thrive in the forest.
Indeed, and I do hope, as you said, people join the thrift shift gathering that's happening tomorrow, the next 3 days. So beautiful opportunity.
Yeah. Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Okay.
Peace out. Yeah.
Have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Much
Bye.
love to you.